At that time, my wife and I were homeless, living in my car. It was an old, beat-up car, but it was the only shelter we had. One day, we parked in the lot of a public library. My wife went inside to handle some paperwork, trying to find some assistance to help us climb out of the hole we were in. Meanwhile, I stayed in the car, using my laptop and the library's Wi-Fi to fill out job applications. The parking lot was crowded. Cars were everywhere, and ours stood out like a sore thumb. Small, dirty, and packed with all our belongings. Then, a huge, shiny SUV pulled into the space next to mine. It was one of those brand new, gleaming vehicles that you're almost scared to look at, but I couldn't tell you the make or model. Suddenly, a tall, thin woman got out of the SUV. She had that typical haircut you'd call a Karen, short, structured, and screaming, "I want to speak to the manager." But it wasn't her haircut that caught my attention. It was the fact that she opened her SUV door and slammed it hard into my car. The sound echoed as if something had been crushed. I froze for a moment and looked up. She got out slowly, acting as if nothing had happened. The worst part wasn't the dent, but the moment she looked me straight in the eye. She literally locked eyes with me. I was expecting at least an "I'm sorry" or some gesture of apology, but no, absolutely nothing. Not a word, not a hint of remorse. She clicked her car lock and walked off toward the library as if I didn't exist. It was like my car, and by extension, me, were nothing more than trash on the side of the road. To be honest, my car was already a wreck. If she had apologized, I probably would have laughed and said something like, "Don't worry, you couldn't make it worse even if you tried." But her arrogant attitude, that way of looking at me like I was an insect, burned me up inside. I spent the next 30 minutes simmering with anger, staring at the dent in my door and replaying her face in my mind as if it had been seared there. When my wife returned to the car, I decided I wasn't going to let it slide. I opened my car door. Hard. Once. Then again. And again. 3 quick, forceful hits against the pristine door of the SUV. By the time my wife was settled in her seat, that SUV didn't look quite so shiny anymore. We got in the car and drove off. As we left, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Satisfaction. A raw, primal satisfaction, like I had reclaimed a small piece of my dignity. I'd like to say I felt guilty afterward, but that would be a lie. It was one of the most gratifying moments of my life. Although, to be honest, I don't think I'd do the same thing today. I have too much to lose now, but in that moment, damn, it felt good. Edit for additional context. I know some people might think I'm a misogynist or something like that, but let me explain. My car was packed to the brim with all my belongings. I was literally sitting in the back seat, crammed among piles of stuff, because it was the only spot where I could catch the library's Wi-Fi signal. I'm a big guy, the kind who doesn't fit well in a small car, so it took me about 5 minutes to crawl up to the front seat and get ready to leave. It was obvious I posed no threat to that woman. And yet, she looked at me with that air of superiority, like I was some dirty peasant who didn't even deserve an apology.
Update 1.
Thank you all for taking the time to read my story and share your thoughts. Honestly, I didn't expect it to get so much attention, and the amount of comments and messages has been overwhelming. While some have been harsh, many have been understanding, and that means a lot to me. Truly, thank you. After reading the comments, I've spent a good part of the week reflecting on what I did. Let me tell you something. When I wrote it, I still felt that mix of satisfaction and frustration that led me to share the story in the first place. But as I read the responses, especially those pointing out the potential legal issues with what I did, I realized something very important. If things had gone wrong, I could have ended up in serious trouble. That thought has been weighing on me. What many of you mentioned is true. It's scary to realize how close I came to getting into trouble over something so, how should I put it, impulsive. In the moment, my reaction felt justified. It was like I needed to do something, anything, to avoid just swallowing the disdain from that woman. But being honest with myself, what I did was something that could have cost me dearly. If someone had seen me, if she had come back right at that moment, or if there had been cameras, things could have gone very differently. This week, I even did some research on local laws regarding property damage. And yes, what I did is technically illegal. If she had decided to file a complaint and it was proven that I was responsible, the consequences wouldn't have been pretty. I don't have money to pay for lawyers or to compensate for damages, and that would have made an already difficult situation even worse. Which brings me to a point I want to address because many of you mentioned it, my emotional state at the time. I'm sure some of you have felt it before, that buildup of small things that eventually makes you snap. Life had been hitting me hard for months, and at that moment, the physical hit to my car felt like the last straw. I know it sounds irrational, but in that moment, I wasn't thinking about consequences or morality. I was just reacting. Now, a week later, I can admit that what I did was a mistake. A mistake that fortunately didn't have severe repercussions, but a mistake nonetheless. I'm not here to justify it, but I do want to be honest about how I was feeling and why I acted the way I did. For those who have sent private messages asking how my wife and I are doing, I want you to know that we're moving forward, one step at a time. We're still facing many challenges, but we've also found small ways to keep fighting. I've received information about some local resources that might help us find more stable housing, and I'm working on several job applications. I don't know how much longer we'll be in this situation, but I'm determined to get us out of it. Finally, I want to say something to those who criticized my story or my attitude. I understand your point. Sometimes we need someone to help us see things from a different perspective to realize what we did wrong. So, while it's not always easy to read criticism, I know that many of you offer it with the intention of being constructive, and I appreciate that. I promise that if there are any updates in my life, or if something changes significantly, I'll let you know.
Update 2.
It's strange, but over these past 2 weeks, I've learned more about myself and how I react to difficult situations, thanks to your responses. After much thought, I've come to a difficult realization. My small act of revenge against that woman and her SUV didn't solve anything. Did it leave her car with a dent? Yes. Did it make me feel better at the moment? Sure. But now that a few days have passed and the adrenaline has worn off, I understand that the satisfaction I felt was only temporary. Looking at it objectively, my action didn't change my situation in the slightest. My wife and I are still facing the same challenges. We're still living in the car, struggling to find a way out. The difference now is that I'm trying to focus my energy on things that can actually make a difference in our lives. I've realized that wasting my time and energy on acts of anger or frustration only pushes me further away from my real goals. In these 2 weeks, I've taken some small but important steps. Thanks to a flyer my wife picked up at the library, we discovered a local job support program. At first, I was hesitant to sign up. I thought it would just be another bureaucratic process that would lead nowhere, but I was wrong. The program includes workshops to improve job skills, and I've already attended 2 of them. Honestly, I can't say they've changed my life yet, but they've given me something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. One thing I've learned in these sessions is how important it is to recognize our own mistakes. One of the people leading the workshops said something that stuck with me. You can't control what others do, but you can control how you respond. That phrase has stayed with me because I feel it perfectly describes what happened in the parking lot that day. I couldn't control how that woman acted, but I definitely could have chosen a different response, one that wouldn't have left me feeling guilty or worried about potential consequences. On the other hand, I want to share something else that made me reflect even more. During the workshop, I heard another participant talk about how he lost his job after an argument with his boss. He was fired, and that led to a chain of unfortunate events that eventually left him in the same situation as us, homeless. His story hit me hard because it made me realize how fragile stability can be. A single moment of anger or poor judgment can set off a domino effect that changes everything. And the worst part is, you don't always realize the consequences until it's too late. That said, I don't want to sound like I'm constantly dwelling on what happened. Yes, I recognize that my reaction wasn't the best, but I also understand that I can't keep punishing myself for it. What's important now is to learn from that experience and use it as a reminder to handle my emotions better in the future. As for my current situation, there haven't been any major breakthroughs yet, but I'm working on it. I've submitted more job applications this week than I did in the entire last month, and I'm trying to stay positive. I know things won't change overnight, but each small step brings me a little closer to getting out of this situation. Additionally, my wife and I have started speaking with some local organizations that offer temporary housing. While we haven't found anything yet, at least we know resources are available, and that gives us a bit of relief. Update 3. I'm happy to share that my wife and I have finally found a bit of stability, at least for now. Through a local organization that helps people experiencing homelessness, we managed to secure a spot in a temporary shelter. It's not luxurious or spacious, but it's warm, safe, and most importantly, it gives us a much-needed break after months of living in the car. Let me be honest, when we first arrived at the shelter, I couldn't help but feel defeated. Part of me still struggled to accept our reality, as if being there meant I had failed somehow. But after the first night, that feeling began to shift. I realized that this shelter wasn't a symbol of failure. It was an opportunity to start over. Just having a bed to sleep in and a place to store our belongings without worrying about the cold or someone breaking into our car feels like a luxury I no longer take for granted. Over the past month, we've been working on small but meaningful steps to improve our situation. For instance, my wife has joined a social assistance program that gives her access to legal and administrative resources that previously felt out of reach. As for me, I'm still attending the job workshops I mentioned in my last update. While I don't have a job yet, I feel much closer to getting one. I've had 2 interviews in the past few weeks, something that seemed like a dream just a month ago. One of the most impactful moments happened a few days ago during one of those interviews. It was for a simple warehouse job, not glamorous, but it paid enough to start saving. When I arrived, the manager looked at me and then at my resume. "Why did it take you so long to apply for something like this?" he asked. I gave him the shortest version of what we've been going through. I didn't expect empathy, but to my surprise, he said something that left me speechless. "We all fall. What matters is how we get back up." I still don't know if I'll get that job, but those words have given me a new perspective. Another significant change is that I've started reconnecting with people from my past, friends and family I'd lost touch with, not because they didn't matter to me, but because I was ashamed to admit where my life had taken me. Recently, one of them reached out after reading my story here. They said something that resonated deeply. "You don't have to face it all alone." That hit me hard because for so long, I felt like it was just my wife and me against the world. But now I'm beginning to understand that accepting help isn't a weakness. It's a step forward. I also want to share something about my mindset now. A month ago, I was filled with anger and frustration, as shown by how I acted in the parking lot with that woman and her SUV. Now, while I can't say I've completely changed, I do feel calmer and more focused. I've realized that while life is often unfair, letting that injustice dictate your actions only makes things worse. I don't want to be a person consumed by anger. I want to be someone who finds ways to overcome adversity without losing hope. Finally, I want to take a moment to thank the people at the organization who helped us find this shelter. I don't know if they'll ever read this, but their work truly makes a difference. When you're at your lowest point, even a little compassion and support can be the push you need to get back up. For those who have asked if I plan to write more updates, the answer is yes. I want to keep sharing my journey, not because I think my story is special, but because if someone going through something similar reads it, maybe they can find some hope. And if there's one thing I've learned this past month, it's that hope is one of the most powerful things we have. Update 4. First, I want to start, as always, thank you. I don't have the words to express how grateful I am for all of you. Now let me share the big news. I finally got a job. It's a part-time position at a local warehouse. Nothing glamorous or particularly well paid. But to me, it's so much more than that. It's a starting point, a chance to begin rebuilding my life and my wife's life as well. When I got the call confirming I'd been hired, it felt like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders, even if just for a moment. I remember sitting at one of the tables in the shelter, trying not to let my emotions show too much. I didn't want the others in the shelter to see my tears, but inside I was screaming with joy. It wasn't just a job, it was a sign that finally something was going right. The job isn't easy. I spend long hours on my feet, moving heavy boxes and organizing merchandise. At first, I thought I wouldn't be able to keep up. After months of living in the car and eating an unhealthy diet, my body wasn't in the best shape. But every time I feel like I can't go on, I remind myself why I'm doing this. This job isn't just a paycheck, it's a chance to regain stability and, over time, a sense of dignity. My wife has also made some progress. Thanks to connections we made through the shelter, she's now working as an assistant at a small local office. It's a temporary position, but it's helping her regain confidence in herself and feel useful again. Watching her leave every morning with a smile is one of the most rewarding things for me. We've been through so much together, and seeing her blossom again gives me the strength to keep going. With both of our incomes combined, we've started planning our next steps. The first thing on our list is to find a place of our own. While the shelter has been a much-needed respite, it's not a place we can stay long-term. We've been saving what we can, and I'm hopeful that within a few months, we'll be able to afford a small apartment. It doesn't have to be fancy, just a place we can call home. I also want to reflect on something important I've learned over these 2 months. Looking back, I see how much I've changed since that day in the library parking lot. At that moment, I was full of anger and frustration, and I reacted in a way that I now understand wasn't constructive. But that event, and everything that followed, has taught me the importance of staying calm and focusing on what truly matters. I can't say I'm a completely different person, but I do know that now I try to think more before I act. Learning that patience and perseverance are key to overcoming challenges has been a valuable lesson. Another thing I want to share is something my wife said to me recently. We were talking about everything we've been through, and she told me, "Sometimes it's in the darkest moments that you find what truly matters." Her words made me reflect on how, despite all the hardships, we've found ways to strengthen each other. It's not easy, and we still have a long road ahead, but I know that together we can overcome anything. Finally, I want to thank you all once again. When I wrote my first post, I never thought I'd get to this point. I thought it would just be a way to vent, to release some of that pent-up frustration. But this space has become so much more than that. It's been a community of support, a source of inspiration, and a reminder that even in the worst times, there are people willing to lend a hand. My plan is to keep sharing my journey with you. I know I'm not out of the woods yet, as they say, but with each passing day, I feel closer to a better life. I hope my story can inspire someone else going through something similar to not give up. There's always a way forward, even when everything seems lost. Thank you for being with me on this journey. I promise to keep working hard to move forward, and I hope that in future updates, I can share even more good news with you. See you soon.